Okay, hi, welcome along everybody to the second of the psychological aspects of exercise lectures. My name's Ben Jackson. I work in the School of Human Sciences. If you don't know who I am, those of you who've done SSEH 1104 or are doing SSEH 1104, you'll have had some lectures from me, and I also coordinate a unit at third year SSEH 3375 in the school. Given that James talked to you last time about the various positive effects associated with exercise, it felt like the most logical, sensible place to go next was to talk a little bit about how we can promote exercise participation, and so that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. If at any point you come across questions, my email address is at the bottom of the slide here. Feel free to get in touch with any questions associated with the lecture. We're going to try and keep the structure relatively straightforward, I hope. I've broken the lecture into two parts, and those two parts address two different questions. And those two different questions address how we might try to promote exercise in different ways for different kinds of people. The first question, question one that you can see on the screen here, is what we might do to try to work with those people who just have absolutely no interest in being active and in exercising, and the methods that we might use just to try to start to promote some interest in exercise and physical activity. The second half of the lecture, in question two there, is focused more on those people who do recognise that they might want to be a bit more active, that they might want to take part in exercise, and what we can do to try to help them follow through with those exercise intentions, to actually put those goals and intentions into place and into practice and get them moving and taking part in exercise. There'll be some coverage of theoretical issues throughout, but what I'll try to do at all times when we're talking about those theory issues is try and make it as practically relevant and as applied as possible, so we'll get at recommendations for how we can actually use the information that we're talking about. The model or the framework that we're going to use to guide the entire lecture and the structure that I've put together is based around this model that you can see here, and that model is from a book chapter by Ryan Rhodes and Alison Quinlan that was published actually in a book that James and I have recently co-edited and that came out in the second half of 2017. And in that book chapter they talked about the different ways that we might approach exercise promotion depending on the considerations that we might have about who we're trying to promote exercise with. And you can see in the model here, if you start on the left hand side, that box that says considerations of the target population, and if you start to move to the right and you move up, you get to the box that says inactive and no current intentions to be active. That's those people who we're going to talk about when we talk about question one in the first half of the lecture today. What do we do with people who don't take part in exercise and have absolutely no interest in doing it as well? If you move to the right from that box, you'll see that heavy focus on self-efficacy, affective judgments, opportunities, norms and benefits. It's those things that we're going to talk about, how we might do those things for those people that we're talking about in question one in the first half of the lecture. If you jump back out and go back to the considerations of target population box, move to the right but this time go down, you'll find yourself at that inactive with some intention to change box. That's what we're going to talk about. Those people are the ones that we're going to talk about in the second half of today's lecture when we look at question two. If you move to the right from that box, you'll see that this time we might focus on volitional regulatory behaviours, affective judgments, what we call implicit associations, building habit and so on. We're not going to talk through all those things, it would just take too long, but we're going to pull out a few of those recommendations associated with those issues just to try to talk about how we might help those people who aren't doing enough exercise but actually do want to do a little bit more, or who aren't doing any exercise but do want to start to take part in some. So you'll see that top box that I've just brought up onto the screen there is what we'll talk about in question one in the first half of the lecture, and the stuff on the bottom half there is question two, the second half of the lecture. Don't worry too much on this figure about the physical activity behaviour and intention assessment box down the bottom. That's basically saying, as part of the model, that anything we do to try to promote exercise participation, we probably want to see if it worked. And so as a result of whatever we might put in place, whatever strategies we use, we'd want to measure people's physical activity behaviour, and we want to measure their intentions, whether or not they want to be involved in physical activity or exercise, just to see if we've had an effect in changing those. Okay, so let's get into question 1. And just a reminder at the top of the screen there in bold, these are those people who have no interest in exercise, and our job is to try to promote some interest, try to get them interested in exercise and intending to take part in some exercise. And you'll see in the figure there, in the picture that's on the screen, I've sliced out the top half of the figure from the previous slide just to remind us what we're focusing on here. We won't go into a lot of detail on all of those things. These are the things that Rhodes would recommend we do for those sorts of people. So the things in the right hand box are the things that will be recommended as being effective for these sorts of people in the left hand box. What we're going to talk about though in this first half of the lecture are these 4 things below here. We're going to talk about trying to promote their self-efficacy. Whenever you see self-efficacy, just think confidence. We're going to talk a little bit about how we might frame information to encourage a greater awareness of the benefits of exercise, the things that exercise might bring. We're going to talk a little bit about social norms as well. Don't worry too much if you don't know what that term is at the moment, because we'll talk through it in a few minutes. And also briefly cover some information that we might provide to those people about the various opportunities that are around them for exercise. We think hopefully if we can do a good job of those 4 things, we might start to encourage some of those intentions to take part in exercise. So you might remember, or if you flick back, you'll see that one of the first suggestions for those people who don't have any intention to exercise and that we're trying to promote, encourage some interest, just some interest in exercise, was to focus on self-efficacy. Now, what do we mean by self-efficacy? Well, anytime we see self-efficacy, it's referring to a type of confidence. And all self-efficacy beliefs are just situation-specific types of confidence. So each of us will carry around a self-efficacy belief about how well we can drive a car, about how well we can give a presentation, about how well we can play all sorts of different sports. It just refers to our confidence in that setting. Now, why is it important? And why is it particularly important for these people who don't have any intentions to be active? That's because not having confidence, not feeling like we're capable or able to do something, particularly with relation to exercise, is often cited as one of the main barriers to taking part in exercise or to even having an interest in exercise. And you can see in the first and the third bullet points on the slide here, for example, that idea that, look, I know I should be active, I know the problems in terms of health issues that might happen to me if I don't take part in regular exercise, but I just don't know how to do it or if I can do it. And with exercise, there's probably 2 kinds of confidence or self-efficacy beliefs that we're really interested in. The first is confidence in our ability to do the things that are part of an exercise session. So for example, as you can see in the bottom bullet point there, the confidence about the exercise activities like, excuse me, do I think I can actually complete physically a 30-minute run? Do I feel like I can actually physically complete a cycling session, or a spin bike session, or a weights session? Can I do the things that are required within that session? That's what we'd refer to as probably our task self-efficacy in exercise. The other thing though with exercise is that it's a behavior that we need to make part of our daily routine, or at least regularly within our weekly routine. And so the other kind of confidence that's really important is whether we feel like we're capable of regulating that behavior. And that's getting at the second part there in point 4, this idea of whether we feel like we've got the regulatory skills to regularly schedule exercise, to make sure that we fit it into our time, to make sure that even when there are other barriers, we can still do it, and that we can maintain it over time as well. So with exercise, we might want to try to promote, for those people who have no intentions, both those task and those regulatory kinds of efficacy beliefs, because they could help just start to get people some intentions to take part in a bit more exercise. Okay, so if confidence is really important and it might help build some intentions among those people who don't have any to take part in exercise, where does confidence come from? What can we do? How can we learn from the information that we've got about how we build confidence to try to help build some confidence in these people in relation to their exercise? There's lots and lots of research that's looked at this, and this research was championed and led by a social psychologist that's really well known called Albert Bandura. And you'll come across, I'm sure, lots of discussion of self-efficacy, certainly if you study my unit later in your degree. The primary, according to Bandura, way that we can give people confidence, or that we derive confidence, is through this idea on the top left there that you can see at the top of that tree, mastery achievements. What effectively that means is that we feel more confident when we've done something well in the past. When we've built up some mastery in whatever task or activity is that we're focusing on, we tend to carry that forward as confidence for future attempts at mastery or future attempts in that domain. So, for example, regular exercisers are most likely to feel pretty confident that they can take part in exercise and that they can regularly schedule and regulate exercise as part of their lifestyle and routine. Vicarious influences on the right hand side refers to observation of other people, and in particular the idea that we might, when we feel like other people are similar to us, derive some confidence in our ability from seeing those other people do the things that we hope to do. So in an exercise situation, for example, if we imagine that we're somebody who's perhaps unfit or overweight and is not really interested in exercise, if we see other people perhaps taking part in an exercise class, looking like they're having fun, coping with the exercise class okay, and most importantly that we feel like we're similar to those people, then it might start to build some confidence that, you know what, hey, maybe I can do that thing as well. The similarity, though, obviously is really crucial. If we are imagining ourselves as somebody who's perhaps overweight and out of shape and isn't really interested in exercise, and then we get shown a video of really fit people looking really, really good and muscular and in tight lycra and coping really well with exercise, that isn't going to provide us with any confidence that we can be the same as them. So the similarity issue is really important there. The third factor, verbal persuasion on the left-hand side, draws from the idea that we might derive or obtain confidence from hearing other people give us positive feedback and give us encouragement. If our partner or our parents or our friends tell us that, you know what, I think you might enjoy exercise and I think you might find some things to do with exercise that you really get benefits from, and I have loads of fun doing it and you might feel the same and I think you'd be fine with it. Those sorts of statements that are designed to build people up, they might translate into a little bit of confidence for the person who's on the receiving end. And finally, the fourth discrete confidence predictor or cause is this idea of the physiological or the emotional state that we're in. Bandura said that when we feel physically strong, free from injury, in good physical shape, and also when we feel emotionally in the right state, when we're not highly anxious, when we're happy, for instance, we interpret all those signs as signs that we have some ability or some capability in the area that we're talking about. So, for example, if we wanted to apply this information, we would focus on trying to create mastery achievements by starting really small for people and explaining that there are elements of exercise that they will be able to take part in, that they will be able to do right now, and that it's not so hard to schedule it regularly into your time, to give them this idea that they could build up some mastery experiences. If we were trying to get at the vicarious influences factor, then we might show people who are similar to them involved in exercise, having fun in exercise, coping okay with different kinds of exercise, just to try to build that. Verbal persuasion, all we can do is really try to encourage people that they might have fun and that they might enjoy it and that they might cope just fine with exercise, and there might be lots of benefits involved in them taking part in exercise. And finally, we can make sure that they're not too stressed about the exercise that they may end up being interested in doing. So we can try to apply that information. And importantly, worth saying that Bandura talks about how these 4 different kinds of sources operate in sequence. The most powerful, according to Bandura, is top left, those mastery achievements. After that, powerful and strong observation of other people, vicarious influences, can be really useful. The third most important, verbal persuasion, and then the fourth, physiological and emotional state. So we might use this information to try to start to build some confidence in people. just wanted to jump out of the discussion there about kind of theoretical stuff, drawing from the Rhodes model, and take a look at how this sort of thing is actually included in some of the health promotion, physical activity promotion campaigns that you guys may be aware of. The Swap It, Don't Stop It campaign is one that I don't think runs anymore, but certainly did for a few years ago. And on the right hand side of the screen here, you can see an example poster from the Swap It, Don't Stop It campaign. There's lots of information here that isn't relevant for increasing confidence, but if you look closely at the bottom left hand side of the poster, the little corner where the text is bold, you can see that it says once you start, it's easy, and it gives some information about the kinds of things that you might do. But although it's really, really brief, that idea of once you start, it's easy, I would argue, might be trying to promote a little bit of confidence in people that, you know what, actually, I can do this, and maybe it's trying to increase people's intentions that way. The second area that we might focus on that was within Rhodes's model for those people who just have no interest in exercise is to try to create more positive attitudes about exercise for those people. The idea being that those people who have no interest in exercise, excuse me again, probably aren't particularly positively disposed to engaging in exercise. They might not, in other words, have very positive evaluations about what exercise can do for them or what exercise is going to be like when they do it. And so what we might need to do is try to change their minds a little bit about the benefits of exercise. And you can see, just to support that material that I'm talking about here on the slide, there are a few things that I just grabbed off the web that talk about the various benefits and the various health differences that exercise can make to us. And it's those sorts of information that are designed to act on people's attitudes and evaluations about exercise. So, if we're going to focus on trying to raise people's attitudes, trying to promote the right kinds of attitudes or evaluations about exercise, then what should we focus on? And this is where there's some really interesting information I think that can help guide us in terms of our efforts there. Again, we're focusing here on people who have no interest in exercise and physical activity. So what do we do? What kinds of things do we tell them about what physical activity and exercise can do for them? What we might think initially, and actually what you see in lots and lots of health promotion and physical activity promotion adverts and mass community marketing campaigns, is that we try to ram down people's throat the idea that exercise is good for us. When you actually look at the stats around people's perceptions about exercise, though, you can see in the second bullet point there, 93% of people in the UK, 97% of those in the US, and I don't know the stat for Australia, but I would imagine it's pretty similar to that. We already know that exercise is good for us. We're already well aware of the various physical health benefits that exercise can bring. And it's those sorts of attitudes in the third bullet point here, those value-based or the kind of cognitive, the thought-based evaluations of exercise that we call instrumental attitudes. For example, our perception that exercise is either useful for us or useless for us, beneficial for us or harmful for us, healthy for us or unhealthy for us. And if we look at the statistic above that, it looks like we don't really need to change people's instrumental attitudes. And so focusing on telling people that exercise is good for us may not actually do much, because there just doesn't look like there's much room for people to change on that belief. But there are other kinds of attitudes that could be really useful. And if we pretty much all of us, I'm on to the fourth bullet point here, hold those positive instrumental attitudes, then how else, what other attitudes can we target? Interestingly, there's this idea of also that we hold affective attitudes, and that's not our value or our thoughts or our cognitive evaluation, it's our emotional evaluation of an activity or an issue or a topic. For example, do we think exercise is enjoyable or unenjoyable? Is exercise fun or is it boring? Is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? That, I would argue, is something that people vary much more on. The idea of whether exercise is enjoyable or not. And it might be there that we can start to really use messages to let people know, particularly these people who don't have intentions to be active, that you know what, there actually might be some benefits about exercise that you're not aware of. And they could come in the form of enjoyment and things like that. So it could be really useful to focus on affective attitudes in those sorts of messages. Again, I wanted to jump out of the kind of the theory stuff and just give an example of where you might see this sort of thing being done. And I did say that lots of the attitude-focused messages are focused on instrumental attitudes, perhaps wrongly. But in here, if you look past the first paragraph where it's talking about it's using people having dogs and dog ownership as a way to perhaps get some easy physical activity. And then in the second section there, it says you don't need to find 30 minutes all at once. 3 lots of 10 or 2 lots of 15 will do just fine. That sort of material might be trying to promote a little bit of confidence in people. The third section says find a friend to exercise with. It's easy to stay committed and it's more enjoyable when you turn it into a social activity. I would argue that that material there might actually be trying to target those affective attitudes among people and trying to increase intentions perhaps as a result of those affective attitudes. So what do we know? If we're looking for ways that we can promote exercise, that we can promote the benefits of exercise, what do we know about the things that exercise might do for us? What different kinds of expectations do people have around the potential benefits associated with exercise? These 3 kinds of outcome expectancies that people have for exercise are what are most commonly looked at in the literature. And as I've said on the right hand side there, if we already know the physical health benefits, if we're already quite well aware of that point number 2 on the left hand side, the way that exercise might improve our appearance or might help our weight, for example, or might help our physical health, we probably don't want to target information at that topic because it's not going to be new information for people. And if these people are inactive and they're hearing messages that they already know, that's not really going to change their behavior. But the other 2 kinds of expectations that people seem to hold, number 1, this idea of social expectations around exercise, might be something that people aren't typically as aware of, and certainly those who don't have the intentions for exercise might not realize that taking part in regular exercise might come with social approval. It might reduce social disapproval. It might come with some other external rewards that we're not aware of. And so messages that tell people about those sorts of things might just be a little bit different from the norm. And if we jump down to number 3, this idea of the self-evaluative expectancies that we might hold. This is the idea that exercise can be good for us in terms of our mood, reducing our stress, improving our self-worth, improving our self-esteem, making us happier. Those sorts of things might not be things that people are quite so aware of compared to the physical health benefits. So the good attitude messages might actually be focused more on these sorts of things that people aren't quite so aware about. You can see on this slide that all I've tried to do is just give you a few examples of the kinds of things that fit underneath each of those 3 different kinds of expectations, and apologies that they're not in the same order as they were on the previous slide. This is a scale that's actually referred to as the multidimensional outcome expectations for exercise scale. And you can see those 3 things that we talked about on the previous slide: physical, social, and self-evaluative expectations. And as I'm talking through here, I'm sure you're looking at the different kinds of things that are covered under each of those 3 broad areas. And it might be argued that the things that are under social outcome expectations and self-evaluative outcome expectations, those might be things that aren't quite so familiar for people relative to the physical things. And so maybe if we're going to focus on trying to change people's attitudes and get some intention enhancement that way, we might be best focusing on those sorts of things that aren't quite so familiar. So, quick recap as we go. We're talking here about what we can do to try to promote exercise for those people who have absolutely no interest in doing it when we start working with them, or when we come to try to intervene with those people. And we've talked about trying to provide some confidence with our messages and the way we communicate. We've also talked about trying to raise attitudes and trying to raise the right kinds of attitudes as well. The third area that was mentioned in that original model for these sorts of people, the Rhodes model, was to work on their social norm perceptions. And that may or may not be something that you're familiar with, but social norms effectively just refer to what we think other people do, the other people around us, what we think they do, and what we think they think we should do. And it's those 2 sorts of beliefs that we try to change when we try to change social norms. And those two types of normative perceptions are defined on the screen here. Those injunctive norms are our thoughts about what we think others think we should do, our beliefs about what other people may or may not endorse for us. For example, my friends, or you could replace that with parents or partner or classmates, think I should exercise. The idea being that if we can encourage people that other people think we should be doing something, then we might actually be able to encourage them to want to do it. The other kind of norm is that descriptive norm that's underneath the injunctive one. Not what do other people think we should do, but what are other people actually doing? For example, my friends, my partner, my classmates, etc., my parents exercise a lot. What are they actually doing? And if we can use messages, and there are some on the right hand side of the screen here that get at this kind of idea. If we can use messages that say, you know what, everybody else loves exercise, everybody else is exercising, lots of people are becoming active, and lots of people around you think that you should be more active. People endorse the benefits of exercise and the value of it. We might be able to increase people's intentions that way. So those social norms are almost about trying to employ or apply a little bit of social pressure to encourage people to take part, in this instance, in exercise. The other thing that we might do is just educate people about the different opportunities that are around them for taking part in exercise. And going back to one of the examples that I showed previously, on the top left here of the screen, the material at the bottom is where I talked about the idea of them trying to promote the perception that exercise can be enjoyable, that affective attitude stuff. What's above that are some recommendations for how easy, in inverted commas, it might be just to start to get some exercise. The opportunities that people might have in front of them that they might not currently be using and that they could use to get a bit more, to be a bit more active. There's also, on the right hand side of the screen and below that, just some simple examples from WA of information sheets and information packs that you'll often see regarding where you can walk, where you can jog, and the bottom one, although you probably can't see it, is a cycle map around Perth. Those sorts of things, the idea behind them is just to let people know about the opportunities that they might have for physical activity and exercise. And I would argue, probably, if it's going to act on anything that we've talked about, it might act on increasing people's confidence a little bit. You might start to think, oh, you know what? It's not actually that hard. There's lots of opportunity around me. I just didn't see it. So that's a nice additional element to those things when we're trying to promote promote intentions among people who don't have any intentions to be active. So really briefly, just to wrap up what we've talked about in terms of question one. Question one about these people who just aren't interested in exercise and what can we do? The idea is that we're trying to build some intentions among these people to actually become a little bit more active. And intentions are positioned in lots and lots of different behavior change and psychology theories, perhaps none more prominently than the theory of planned behavior. And the theory of planned behavior starts with a really simple principle. The idea is that if we intend to do something, if we want to do something, that's likely to lead to us doing that thing. And so in the case of exercise, if we intend to be a relatively active person, that's likely to encourage us to be active and take part in exercise. What we've talked about really are the things that might shape intention, and the things that I've just brought onto the slide here are in the theory of planned behavior, the things that are recognized as predictors of intention. So the things that we can change that might then result in a change in intentions. And without going into too much detail, those three things, perceived behavioral control, attitudes toward the behavior, subjective norms, you'll see lots of overlap between the things that we've just talked about and the things that are on the slide here. Perceived behavioral control, that number one box at the top there in bold, actually refers to people's confidence or their perception about their ability to take part in a behavior. The idea being, if we can raise their confidence and their perception of their ability, that we're likely to raise their intentions to take part in it as well. And so the recommendations that I made about improving confidence actually might have knock-on effects, according to the theory of planned behavior, on intentions. And you'll see in box number 2 and box number 3 are attitudes toward the behavior, both instrumental and affective. If we can make those more positive, then we're likely to raise intentions. And our subjective norms, injunctive and descriptive, if we can improve and increase those, again, the theory would say that we can have a knock-on effect on intention. So all those things, hopefully, that we've talked about in relation to question 1 might have effects on our intentions, on those people's intentions to be active, which should in turn influence their behaviour, at least according to the theory. Just because I've talked through that without actually giving the definitions of those things on the screen, I just wanted to put in a brief slide here just when it comes to revision time, just in case you want written out definitions of those sorts of different concepts that we talked about. No new information on this slide whatsoever, just a little bit of definition stuff from the previous slide. Okay, so we'll leave question 1 there. And that's all we're going to talk about in terms of question 1, in terms of those people who just don't want to be active, and the strategies that we might use, successful or otherwise, to try to promote some intentions. Let's move on now and talk about question 2. Different group of people. And as a result of being a different group of people, probably a slightly different approach needed to try to get the best out of these people. These people are those who want to be active, but maybe aren't actually taking part and following through with those intentions. And so we need something for these people to try to make those intentions turn into, for want of a better term, behaviour. We know, for example, that there's a really well-known statistic that's shown on the left-hand side of the screen here, that even among those people who do start exercise, over half of those people tend to drop out from exercise within the first 6 months. So there's clearly a problem or a gap between what we want to do and what we actually find ourselves doing, particularly with exercise. And the section that I've just brought up onto the slide here on the bottom, again, that figure on the left, the picture on the left, is just the sliced out bottom part of Rhodes's model from the book chapter that I referred to. And that's those people who are inactive and have some intention to change. Now, on the right of that, leading from with the arrow, there's too much stuff in there for us to cover in the 10 or 15 minutes or so that we've got left. And so I'm just going to pick out a few of the simple things that we might be able to talk about. But it's these sorts of things, and you'll notice that some of those are quite different from what we talked about in relation to question 1. These sorts of things are the things that Rhodes at least would recommend that we do in order to try to encourage people's intentions to turn into behaviour. And what he and others refer to there is this idea of what they call action control. All these things, the focus on volitional behaviours, affective judgments, all those things are designed to give people more what they term action control. And so we'll talk in the next slide a little bit about what we mean exactly by action control. So what is action control? Simply, it's the translation of intentions into action. It's turning those desires to be more active or to exercise into actually being more active and exercising. Picture a person that we've educated about the benefits of exercise. We've developed some confidence. We've given the subjective norm information, and we've provided lots of information about the different opportunities for exercise, and we've had success. We've made that person want to do some exercise. Now our job is to try to turn that readiness, that intention, into action, and ideally long-term action. And that's where we can use this idea of action control. We can try to make people better controllers of their own actions. The 3 things that I want to talk about relatively briefly in here are this idea of regulatory behaviours, the things that we might do to help them regulate their behaviours. Again, a focus on affective factors, a little bit like we did with the affective attitudes in question 1, and also information about how they might handle goal conflict. Effectively, what I mean by that is how they might manage exercise alongside all the other things that they need to do in their lives and in their lifestyle. So for the rest of the lecture, if you want to position where this material is, these are all things that are going to hopefully help with action control. And action control is something that helps turn intentions into behaviour. In terms of regulatory behaviours, it's a bit of a mouthful and it's a bit unclear. All it really means are the various different strategies that we might employ that are designed to help us become good regulators of our different behaviours. And there are lots of different things that we might do. And the reading that you guys have got associated with this lecture is actually a bit of a review of lots and lots of different regulatory behaviors, behavior change strategies that might help us stick to intentions. A few of the really most prominent ones I'm going to cover in the next few slides, and goal setting, and in particular planning, is something that's seen as really, really important in turning an intention into a behavior. We might want to become more physically active, but if we don't make good plans for how to do that, then we might not actually become more physically active. And in this health action process approach model, it's just another theory, it's another framework about how we can understand people's behavior. Two types of planning are covered. There's lots more in the theory than we're going to talk about today, but we're just going to talk about and pull out these two types of planning that they talk about. Look at the left hand side of the screen for now, this idea of what we call action planning. And that's really the what's, where's, how's, when's and why's of how we're going to act. So we take somebody who wants to be physically active, who wants to exercise, and we ask them to make action plans by thinking about when are they going to do it, where are they going to do it, what kind of exercise are they going to do, who might they do that exercise with, how are they going to go about fitting that exercise into their routine. And what that does is it provides support for those intentions. It helps translate those intentions into action. It makes people more likely to follow through with their intentions because the plan makes it easier for us to do it on an ongoing basis. Probably helps our confidence at regulating the behavior, something that we talked about in question 1. What we also encourage people to do, though, as part of a good planning exercise is not just think up the hows and the whens and the whys and the whos and the whats and the wheres. We try to get people thinking about what could go wrong, what could get in the way of your plan. And I'm talking now, I've moved over to the right hand box, this coping planning idea. What are the risks? What are the challenges to this behavior? What are the challenges to this plan of you becoming more active? What are the barriers that might get in the way of you being regularly active? And in exercise, that tends to be things like a lack of time, a change in our plans so that exercise is no longer something that we've got time for, a lack of motivation. It could be bad weather, it could be an injury, it could be not having our exercise partner or exercise group to go to, it could be not having much money and not being able to pay for the gym. All those sorts of things might be potential barriers that could get in the way of our intention and our action plan. And so what we try to do with good coping plans is get people to think up strategies for getting around those barriers if and when they come up. And there's lots of research in the psych literature about this idea of implementation intentions. Implementation intentions are just if-then plans. If A happens, I'll do B. If X gets in the way of my exercise, then I'm going to do Y to make sure that I can still exercise. And so we try to get people coming up with these really strong, good, well thought out, realistic coping plans as a way to help them get through those problems when they do arise. And it's a good habit to get into. If you guys think about applying this to any study or any exercise or any sport that you might take part in, it's a really nice thing to do. The old saying that forewarned is forearmed really is true, and this kind of coping planning helps us feel forewarned about the types of barriers that might come up. Another really nice simple regulatory strategy, and one that's been shown to actually be really, really useful, is this idea of self-monitoring. And there are some examples of the kinds of things that we might use to monitor our exercise levels in the pictures on the screen, from on the left hand side the really simple stuff, paper and pen diaries, through to apps that we might use, or things like Fitbits that we might actually wear. The idea behind self-monitoring is that it can do two things for us. It can raise a bit of awareness about just how much of a behavior we are doing. We're not often that great without monitoring closely. We're not often that great at just knowing exactly what it is we're doing all the time and reflecting on it accurately. So some self-monitoring like this can be useful in terms of helping us to understand where we're at and how we're doing in terms of reaching our progress and reaching our intentions for exercise. The other thing it can do, if we're doing a good job, is it can provide us with some confidence. We might look at our app, for example, and see that we've hit our 10,000 steps goal for the last 10 days in a row, and that can help boost our confidence and make us feel like we're doing a good job. So self-monitoring, keeping track of how we're going, can be something that's really useful in terms of these regulatory behaviors as well. And finally, this idea of enlisting support, getting help from other people. Really simple suggestion, but a really powerful one as well. And in terms of exercise, there are probably two ways that we can enlist support and get help. Two broad ways. The first is that people might not necessarily be active or exercise with us, but they can encourage us to do it. And they can maybe help us out with our other challenges around exercise, our study, our family commitments, our social commitments, our work, and so on. They might help us structure those things or take the weight from us on some of those things so that we've got time for exercise. The other way that support can help, and this is alluded to on the screen here with the pictures, is that we actually know that if we exercise with other people who we like and who are often similar to us and we get along with, then those people can make the exercise more fun. And as a result of it being more fun, we're more likely to do it. So we can get support not just around our exercise, but actually also in terms of being active with other people as well, which can really help. All these things hopefully would start to help translate those intentions for these people actually into regular exercise behavior. One of the other things that was talked about in relation to question 2 was this idea of focus on affective factors. And when we talk about affect, we're talking about emotion. How can we apply that sort of information? Well, there are lots and lots of different ways. We can make sure that we give people a say about the kinds of exercise that they want to do, that they're going to find the most enjoyable. And then we can structure their exercise in relation to that sort of thing. We can give lots and lots of positive feedback. We know that when people feel competent and capable, they tend to be happier. We can set up nice supportive groups around people to try and encourage exercise, enjoyment, and positive affect. One thing that we can also do ahead of people's exercise participation is create expectations that exercise is going to be enjoyable, or that it's going to have positive effects on our mood and our affect broadly. There's lots and lots of work about the benefits of exercise for our psychological well-being, and so much work that you can see here in the picture that I've shown. This is a meta-analysis, which is just where we take all the studies in an area that are focusing on a certain topic, and we swirl all those studies around in a pot, and we pull out whatever the main conclusions are. And in this case, this meta-analysis was designed to look at just how much of the positive effects of exercise on psychological well-being are due to exercise versus due to the expectation that exercise will be good for our psychological well-being, that idea of the placebo effect. If I think something's going to happen, surprise, surprise, it often happens. And the same's true with exercise and enjoyment and our well-being. If we think strongly that exercise is going to have those effects for us, surprise, surprise, it tends to have those effects for us when we actually think about it and we rate our exercise experiences. Now, you don't need to go through the abstract in detail there, but the results show what we call the effect size, the strength of the effect of exercise on psychological outcomes, like things like anxiety, depression, energy, and so on, these affective factors. An effect size is basically just an indication of how strong an effect is, and in this case you can see that the effect size for exercise training on those different affective grouped factors was 0.37. Now, it doesn't really matter what that is. That's actually indicative of a relatively moderate sized effect, so something that's clinically meaningful. But what's important here is that about 0.2 of that effect size, so about half of the effect that exercise is having on these things, was due to our expectation that it would have these effects. Nothing at all to do with the actual exercise that we took part in, just the expectation that we took into the session. And so if we can encourage people to have those positive expectations, then we might be able to harness the benefit and the power of these placebo effects and translate those intentions into action, because people will end up having more positive experiences. And the final section that I want to talk about is this idea of how we might handle goal conflict, how we might use information that we know about how people can deal with different behaviors and manage multiple behaviors all at once in order to make sure they can reach their exercise goals and meet those intentions alongside all the other things that happen in a busy life. One of the confidence beliefs that's really useful and is really relevant here is this idea of what we call concurrent self-regulatory efficacy. Again, when we see self-efficacy, we see confidence, we think confidence. And in this case, self-regulatory efficacy just refers to our confidence in our ability to regulate a certain action. The concurrent part refers to individuals' confidence to manage or to regulate multiple goals in their life at once. So for example, on the bottom right hand side of the screen there, you can see, for instance, how confident are you in your ability to manage your time so that your progress toward, say, your exercise goals and also your degree is effective. And what we know is that during times of stress, like examination periods for undergrads, like transitions from school to uni, where our life tends to be in fluctuation a little bit, when we have really strong concurrent self-regulatory efficacy beliefs, we tend to be able to stick to those behaviors that we want to do a bit better. So we tend to be able to carry on our physical activity or exercise through those times of challenge if we feel like we're capable at doing that. And so the next natural question and the final point that I really want to make in the lecture is, okay, well, if concurrent self-regulatory efficacy, if feeling like we're pretty good at handling multiple things is important, then how can we encourage people to feel like they're good at handling multiple things all at once? My argument there would be actually that we've already talked about that. And if you think about the applications of the different kinds of planning activities that we talked about, including prioritization and time management strategies, if you think about what effects enlisting support from other people might have, if you think about the benefits associated with self-monitoring and receiving encouragement from others, all those things are probably, I would argue, going to make us better at managing our behaviors and at handling lots of different things all at once. And so those things that we talked about when we covered regulatory behaviors are probably, I would argue, things that are really important for trying to boost people's beliefs in their ability to manage multiple things. So a nice byproduct of those regulatory behaviors that we talked about at the start of question 2 is that they might have these sorts of positive effects as well. Summary time. Okay, wrapping up what we've talked about. And hopefully it's been relatively clear for you guys. Any questions, again, please just get in touch over emails, easiest anytime. What we've talked about are two different approaches. One approach based on dealing with people who are inactive and have no intention of being active. And that's on the top half of the model there that we talked through in question 1. In question 2, we dealt with a different group of people, and we actually talked in most instances about different strategies that might work better for those people, and they were the inactive people but who did have some intention of becoming more active or being regularly active. So while we talked through all the different components of the two right hand side boxes, I actually just wanted to jump here at the very end back to that first box and say that what's really important here and what the fundamental message associated with this framework is that we need to know who we're talking to before we start trying to persuade them to be more active or to increase their physical activity. We need to understand that population, because different messages and different strategies are going to work better or worse depending on the kinds of people that we've got. And really in this model there are only two kinds of people. There's actually a lot more. There might be, for example, people who've been regularly active in the past and who want to get back into their physical activity. Different strategies might work for those people compared to the ones on the screen. There might be people who are active but want to increase their level of physical activity. And again, different sorts of strategies might work for those people relative to those on the screen here. So the key message, the key takeaway, I think, is that if we want to do a good job of this, we need to make sure that we speak the right language to people. We need to understand what they need and then try to shape our messages and our communications accordingly, which is why it's hard in these mass community statewide messaging campaigns to hit everybody, because we just don't know who the messages are going to get to, and that's what's really important in this framework. Not going to spend too much time on these next two slides. These next two are the last two slides. It's just a little bit of summary information that I hope is useful as you come to go over and try to recap on this lecture. The first summary slide here is in relation to question 1, where we talked about strategies that might work for people who just have no interest in exercise. How can we start to light that fire and get that spark going? We talked a little bit about, in the bottom 3 pictures on the slide there, building their confidence, providing information on the left hand side perhaps about the things that exercise can do for us that we maybe aren't already aware of, to try to promote attitudes, and also to try to in a way induce that social pressure through normative perceptions. And then we brought that together, top right hand picture on the slide, and gave a little bit of information about how it might fit, those sorts of things might actually fit with that theory of planned behaviour that we know well. And the same for question 2, again just a recap of the main things that we spoke about. In the middle box at the bottom there you can see that it's a reminder that we talked about different regulatory behaviours, and those regulatory behaviours, one of them is shown in the picture above in terms of planning strategies, both action and coping planning. We also talked in there a little bit about other kinds of regulatory behaviours, things like enlisting support and self-monitoring. We then talked about how we might use the power of affective factors to try to make positive experiences for people, and the one example that we used for that is maybe the power of the placebo effect, developing positive expectations for people and hoping that those things might encourage intention translation into behaviour. And finally we talked about this importance of handling goal conflict, and we drew from the idea of this concurrent self-regulatory efficacy belief, the idea of whether we're good or not at managing lots of different things at once. And we talked about how the regulatory behaviours might actually encourage us to feel a bit more capable at juggling lots of different balls all at once. Okay, that's all guys, and thank you for your attention. I appreciate you working through the lecture. Again, if there are questions at any point, please get in touch, and if not, good luck for the unit and all the best, and I'm sure we'll chat again before too long. Thank you.